Picture this downtown Orlando Halloween night.
Oh, yeah.
It's just past 1 a.m. You're surrounded by, 50 to 100,000 people,
Wow.
all dressed up in costumes, music's going, energy's electric, and
Yeah.
then gunshots, chaos, everything changes.
Sadly, a scene we've seen play out too many times. You know, a chilling reminder that even when we're celebrating, danger can be lurking right there in the shadows.
It's true. And that's what we're diving into today. The Orlando shooting from this past Friday. Using news reports and the Orlando Police Department's social media updates, we're going to try to piece together what happened. 2 people dead, 7 injured.
Yeah, and it's easy to hear those numbers and just think, oh, another shooting, but we have to remember that behind every single one of those numbers is a story cut tragically short.
Absolutely. So let's get into the specifics of what we know so far. The first shots, according to the Orlando Police Department, were reported at 1:07 a.m., right near the intersection of Central Boulevard and Orange Avenue.
And then minutes later, another shooting, further south on Orange Avenue near Washington Street. So think about that. 2 separate scenes, both erupting in the middle of this huge moving crowd.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine.
Talk about a logistical nightmare for law enforcement. I mean, trying to secure those scenes, getting to the victims, and then trying to identify and catch the suspect.
Right.
All while surrounded by thousands of people in costumes.
It's mind-boggling, and the report from Orlando Regional Medical Center about the victims is heartbreaking. The ages range from 18 to 39, injuries, all different levels of severity. The youngest victim was an 18-year-old white male shot in the lower left leg, and the oldest, a 39-year-old white female, shot in the left hand.
And remember, it wasn't just the people who were actually hit by the bullets. A 26-year-old Hispanic female was injured while trying to escape the chaos, got trampled in the panic.
Oh, wow.
Really makes you think about how these events impact so many more people than just those who are directly targeted.
It's true. And then there's the suspect, a 17-year-old with a prior arrest record.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer to this, isn't it?
It makes you wonder, did the system fail to rehabilitate him? What leads someone down this path?
Well, that's where things get really complicated, right? We all want justice, but in this case, it raises so many tough questions about juvenile crime and repeat offenders. What are the root causes here? Were there missed opportunities to intervene?
And we also have to remember, this isn't the first time downtown Orlando has seen gun violence on Halloween. There was that shooting back in 2021. It feels like a disturbing trend.
It is, and it points to a much bigger problem. Gun violence is plaguing our country. We need to move beyond just reacting after these tragedies happen. We need to be asking, what can we do to prevent them? How do we make public spaces safer, not just on Halloween, but every single day?
Right. And we always hear about Crime Line in these situations. They offer rewards for anonymous tips that lead to arrests. But is that really enough?
Well, Crime Line definitely plays an important role. It gives the community a way to be directly involved in keeping their streets safe. But to understand if it's truly effective, I think we need to dig a little deeper. Look at their track record. See how many cases have actually been solved because of Crime Line tips.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And another question is, how do they maintain that trust with the community? And how do they ensure that people feel comfortable coming forward with information? Those are all things we should explore to really gauge their impact.
It's clear that there are so many layers to this tragedy, from the immediate impact on the victims to the broader issues of gun violence, juvenile crime community safety measures. This event raises more questions than it answers.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to unpack these complexities, to move beyond the headline, to really wrestle with these difficult questions. It's not just about understanding what happened, but about using this event to learn more about our society and to figure out what steps we can take to build a safer future for everyone.
We're going to take a quick break now and come back in part 2 to focus on the police response, the ongoing investigation, and some of the potential strategies for preventing these tragedies from happening again.
We'll dive into the challenges of crowd management. We'll look at what investigators will be focusing on, and we'll explore some ideas for creating safer public spaces. So stick with us. There's a lot more to uncover.
Back now and thinking about that night, I mean, it's hard to imagine the pressure the Orlando Police Department was under. 2 active shooting scenes, huge crowds. The clock is ticking.
You know what's really impressive, though, is how quickly they responded. I mean, those first shots were reported at 1:07 a.m., and they were already at both locations within minutes. They even apprehended that 17-year-old suspect before they even put out their initial statement on social media.
Wow, that's incredible. Talk about working under pressure. And we can't forget about those first responders and medical personnel either. Rushing into that chaos, Multiple gunshot victims, a panicked crowd, the possibility of even more violence. I mean, they were dealing with a nightmare.
Absolutely. And I think their bravery and quick response definitely saved lives that night.
Mm.
It's easy to get caught up in analyzing what happened. But we can't forget about the incredible courage of everyone who responded to this tragedy.
No, we can't. So let's turn our attention now to the investigation. As authorities build their case against a suspect, what can we expect to see happen?
Well, they're going to be meticulously putting together a timeline, analyzing all the evidence, interviewing witnesses, scrutinizing every single detail,
Right.
and that suspect's prior arrest record. That's going to play a big role.
Yeah.
It's going to lead to a much deeper investigation into his potential motives,
Yeah.
possible connections to the victims, and any kind of patterns in his past offenses.
And I imagine his social media activity and any communication he had leading up to the shooting, that'll all be under a microscope, right?
Absolutely. Investigators are going to be looking for anything that could shed light on his state of mind. Were there any signs of premeditation?
Yeah.
Any connections to extremist groups or ideologies that might have influenced him?
It's like they're trying to solve a giant jigsaw puzzle, searching for all the missing pieces to figure out what led to this horrific act.
Exactly. And this is where the public's help is so crucial. Even a tiny little detail, something that might seem insignificant, could be the missing piece that helps investigators connect the dots. So if anyone out there has any information, no matter how small it is, they should contact Crime Line or the Orlando Police Department.
It's a good reminder that we all have a part to play in this, seeking justice and trying to prevent these kinds of tragedies in the future. But let's step back for a moment and think about the bigger picture. How does this event fit into the larger issue of gun violence in this country?
That's the question that keeps coming up, isn't it? This tragedy, along with so many others, forces us to face some really uncomfortable truths about our society. Easy access to firearms, not enough resources for mental health, and all the systemic inequality. All of these things contribute to this problem, this complex and widespread problem of gun violence.
So then where do we go from here? How do we stop just reacting to these tragedies and start doing something to prevent them?
There's no easy answer, no magic solution. But we need to start by acknowledging the problem and committing to finding solutions. We need to have honest and open conversations about gun control, invest in real mental health services, and address all those underlying social and economic factors that contribute to violence.
That sounds like a huge undertaking. It can feel a little overwhelming, to be honest. Where do we even start?
I know it's a daunting challenge,
Yeah.
but it starts with us acknowledging the problem and committing to finding solutions. We need to support those organizations that are working to reduce gun violence. We need to advocate for sensible gun legislation. And we need to elect leaders who prioritize public safety.
Okay, so what about on a more individual level? What can we do in our own communities to create a culture of safety and well-being?
That's a great question. I think it starts with fostering a culture of empathy and understanding, checking in on our friends and neighbors, being aware of our surroundings, reporting anything suspicious to the authorities. It's about being proactive and looking out for each other.
It's about building communities where people feel connected, supported, and safe.
Exactly. We can't just wait for these tragedies to happen and then react. We need to be proactive in building stronger, more resilient communities. Communities that can withstand these kinds of shocks and prevent violence from taking root.
We've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. We've analyzed the police response, examined the ongoing investigation, and explored the wider context of gun violence and potential solutions, but we're not done yet.
In our final part, we're going to shift our focus to the long-term impacts of this event on the Orlando community, and we're going to delve into that process of healing and recovery.
We'll explore how communities cope with this kind of trauma, examine the role of resilience in the aftermath of tragedy, and consider how this event might shape public policy and community safety initiatives going forward. We're back now for the final part of our deep dive, and this time we really want to focus on the long-term impacts of this tragedy on the Orlando community and how everyone heals and rebuilds after something like this.
It's so important to remember that the trauma from that night, it's not going to disappear just because the headlines fade. This is collective trauma.
Yeah.
It impacts the victims, their families, the first responders, the witnesses, the whole city, really.
Yeah, you're right. It's like this shockwave just rippling outwards, leaving a mark on everyone.
In trauma, it shows up differently in everyone. Some people might experience anxiety flashbacks, trouble sleeping. Others might struggle with guilt, anger,
It's
fear.
so personal, and everyone's journey of healing is going to be different. So, what kind of resources are available for people who are struggling with the emotional fallout of all of this?
Well, the city of Orlando has a whole network of mental health services and support groups, specifically for those impacted by the shooting. And there are also national organizations like the National Center for Victims of Crime. They offer guidance and resources to help people navigate that long road to recovery.
It's good to know those resources are out there, but I imagine the healing process is going to be anything but easy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to grieve or to heal. It's not a straight line. And it's so important to be patient with yourself and with others as
Yeah.
you all go through this.
Right.
There will be good days and bad days, and that's completely normal.
Speaking of navigating those tough times, how do you think this event is going to shape public policy and community safety initiatives going forward?
That's hard to say for sure, but I think we'll probably see renewed calls for stricter gun control measures, increased funding for mental health services, and maybe a bigger focus on things like community policing. And those violence prevention programs.
Yeah, it seems like every time one of these tragedies happens, the gun control debate starts all over again. Do you think this time will be any different?
Well, the issue of gun control is so divisive. It's really tough to predict if this event will be the one to spark real change. But I do think that, along with all the other tragedies we've seen, they will keep the conversation going and hopefully push us towards a more comprehensive approach to dealing with gun violence.
It's a conversation we can't avoid. The status quo is obviously not working. We can't keep losing people to gun violence.
You're right.
Yeah.
We have to move beyond the talking points and find some common ground. We need to focus on solutions that prioritize public safety and preventing these tragedies from happening in the future.
And so that brings us to our final thought, a question we want to leave you with today. What role can each of us play in creating a safer and more resilient community?
It's a good question to think about. Maybe it's advocating for policy changes or supporting local organizations, or maybe it's just being more present and engaged in our communities.
Maybe it's having those tough conversations about gun safety and mental health with our friends and families. Or maybe it's just reaching out to someone who's struggling and offering to listen.
I think every act of kindness, every effort to build understanding and connection contributes to a more compassionate and resilient society.
That's a great point. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to extend our deepest condolences to the victims of this tragedy and their families. Our thoughts are with you all during this difficult time.
And to everyone listening, remember, you're not alone. Let's keep having these important conversations. Let's support each other and work together to create a future where tragedies like this are just a distant memory.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.